A couple of weeks ago, I witnessed a pretty frustrating exchange over on TikTok. Part of my frustration stemmed from the fact that one of the pair who were in this argument was getting ratioed with every post they made, and part of it was the fact that each of them holds distinct social capital, with one being an activist slash influencer, and the other being a major musical artist. The situation in question centered on rapper Cardi B making jokes with her fans on Twitter about how they sold out her 3x size merchandise, inadvertently regurgitating exclusionary rhetoric about plus-size people that, intentional or not, delved into fat phobia. There were a few comments here and there that pointed out how Cardi should be cognizant that not all of her fat fans find these jokes funny, but the vast majority of the sentiments were the complete opposite. So the discourse went something like this.
OMG, did you see the reaction Samyra made about Cardi B? That was so out of pocket. It was just a joke. I don't understand why Samyra had to chime in.
I mean, sure, but Cardi didn't have to lash out right back at Samyra for voicing her opinion, but Samyra does pose valid points about how making jokes at the expense of fat people does have real-world implications.
Whoa, this guy thinks everything has a deeper meaning. Not everyone needs to insert themselves into groups they can't handle. Sometimes people enjoy jokes that punch down on themselves. He's out here shaming those who enjoys Cardi's joke. You fucking spoil sport.
Not sure how that proves what I said wasn't serious. There are many ways to make jokes that doesn't frame somebody's body size in a negative light. I'm not saying that jokes of this nature can't be made at all. However, when someone in the community is directly affected by it, their voices shouldn't be silenced in favor of making the joke. You feel me?
Okay, spoil sport.
It's really not worth talking to you about this if you're not going to listen to me.
Hey, check out this guy in the corner crying over a joke.
That's so lame! Spoil sport! Spoil sport!
Spoil sport, spoil sport,
Spoil sport! Spoil sport?
In a nutshell, that's basically what happened. The most telling part about these exchanges was that people defending Cardi's jokes in Samyra's comments received upwards of 100,000 likes, while comments defending Samyra received upwards of a few thousand. Due to the onslaught of dogpiling sent towards Samyra's page, she took a break from social media. Eventually, the heat died down, but not without any remaining residue.
In this entire debate, on every single video that I've watched between the Cardi B and Samyra situation, there's several comments talking about, you know what, I'm just gonna say it, I don't like Samyra, I think she's annoying, and that's part of why I don't care about what she has to say. But when somebody wants to talk about how Black Lives Matter and wants to stand up for Black people, they constantly have to talk about the injustices done against Black folks, right? They constantly have to point out the issue over and over and over again, because for some people it may be the first time that they've ever heard of that. So when I talk about Samyra being an activist for larger bodies, you feel uncomfortable because you don't think that that's something that should have activism.
How is it that it's not that deep only ever goes one way in these discussions? Someone says something ignorant or inflammatory about LGBTQ people. We have to shut up or we're hypersensitive. Someone says something about dark-skinned women. Oh, well, Shanae, stop being insecure. But in response to the ignorant shit, all it takes is a person from a marginalized community to go, hey, I kind of don't like that. And suddenly it's okay to bite somebody's head off simply for expressing their own perspective.
Comments shutting down Samyra's perspective were repeating a popular argument that trails in discussions of pop culture and media. It's not that deep. A viewpoint positing that introspection and examination of a topic are unnecessary when online spaces are meant for escapism, which brings us to the elephant in the room. Anti-Intellectualism, more specifically, the impending death of critical thinking. Over the past year, there's been a lot of chatter over this term, as well as the conversation surrounding media literacy. However, as discourse on the internet tends to function, the conversation quickly lost the plot. It became less about exploring how to engage with media, but more of a pissing contest to see who had the correct answer, leaving little wiggle room for nuance or alternative stances on anything, and projects a narrow view of what resembles media engagement. Here is where my distaste appears for this conversation. There has been a noticeable uptick in the reactionary measures people take when confronted with content that delves deeper beyond the surface. Modern media discourse as it stands exists in contradiction to the ethos of the medium residing in art, meaning media discussions aren't devoid of social and cultural context and thrive off of complexity and thorough analysis. That's not hyperbole, but is deliberately the point. So why is diving deeper into a topic or criticism becoming so growingly heated? Is there a substantial gain to remaining dismissive and oblivious to experiences outside of your own? These questions address a broader topic than just people hurling insults at you due to a lack of critical thinking. The rejection of introspection and the refusal to engage with life in a complex manner is not a new phenomenon, one that is rooted in an aversion to difference and the demonization of thought itself. Hofstadter captured this concept extensively in his book Anti-Intellectualism in American Life. Hofstadter details how intellectualism in America has been a double-edged sword due to its ability to challenge pre-established norms. He makes a clear distinction between intellect and intelligence and how these contribute to the hostility that arises from reflection. While intelligence seems to manipulate, adjust, and grasp subjects to make them malleable, intellect instructs us to critique, examine, theorize, wonder, and imagine. And if you guess the latter was the one that was treated as a potential threat, you've earned yourself a cookie. Universities became the punching bag for implementing free thought, which during McCarthyism was seen as uncivilized. Professors were blacklisted for presenting ideas centered on identity or even questioning the nature of capitalism. There is also a masculine overtone to surveilling knowledge and intellect. Professions that don't exist within the male social milieu were immediately met with suspicion. During the 19th century, when business became a dominant part of American culture, acquiring skills was seen as more important than having a formal education. This belief centered on men not needing to educate themselves outside of their careers and personal aspirations. Intellectuals outside of business and science are seen as unmasculine, and therefore their knowledge must be illegitimate. Anti-intellectualism isn't rooted in the fear of intellect alone, but also remaining complicit in systems of power and privilege. Looking deeper is the antithesis of societal growth. The act of critical thinking wasn't just looked down upon. It was seen as dangerous. These pervasive stones that built anti-intellectualism blend into the current iteration of this dilemma. While the phrase "it's not that deep" used to be thrown around in playful banter, the way it's used now deeply contrasts that. The mindset has undergone a curse-marked transformation that's infested nearly every nook and cranny of the internet.
Well, actually, all art is political. No. Art is inherently political. No, it isn't. This is one of those things that, kind of feels good to say, but, crumbles under the smallest amount of logical scrutiny. Not all art is political. Just breathe.
Why are we making everything a problem all the time? Maybe it's not that deep.
There are a multitude of reasons why the phrase "it's not that deep" is both reductive and unhelpful. The notion that looking deeper into a subject is not important is the denial to zoom out of your point of view. Minimizing the severity of situations to suspend your disbelief only serves to satisfy yourself and not sympathize with others. When we dive deeper into the body of a topic, we discover things that we were not susceptible to prior.
My thesis is titled Olfactory Ethics: The Politics of Smell in Modern and Contemporary Prose. So I look at why certain authors of the past century use smell to indicate social hostilities, and I connect these literary examples with the real world understanding of smell and how we think about smell in society. It didn't even occur to me, actually, that it could blow up in a negative way after it was retweeted by a couple of right-wing accounts who had kind of mocked the idea of my thesis.
10 years of childbearing youth that she will never regain.
A liberal arts education is worth nothing.
Academia is a disaster. We should be teaching math, science, not this nonsense. Make education great again.
By instantly invalidating views that are critical or non-positive, we remove insight that leaves gaps in our knowledge, especially if it pertains to certain communities being portrayed in unfavorable lights. If it doesn't concern me, why should I care? If the harm cannot be detected by the general populace, the discussion of potential harm should be automatically shut down. A few weeks ago, American Eagle released an ad featuring actress Sydney Sweeney portraying herself as someone who has inherently gray genes. However, the language used to describe Sydney's genes emphasized her physical attributes, such as having blonde hair and blue eyes.
Genes are passed down from parents to offspring, often determining traits like hair color, personality, and even eye color. My genes are blue.
Sydney Sweeney has very genes.
Calling specific attention to hair and eye color to suggest an individual has superior features is far from a neutral stance. Given the current political climate in America, this rightfully rubbed people the wrong way. While it is important not to make baseless accusations, especially if they are not truthful and are not made in good faith. However, in the context of the American Eagle ad, its staunch defenders are only painting criticism in a black and white picture. With the leadership team working on the project being predominantly white, it's obvious this ad's targeted demographic leaned into the MAGA crowd. When American Eagle addressed the backlash, to put it frankly, it wasn't the response people wanted to hear. This alignment became even more noticeable when the White House's official Instagram account posted a promotion for the ad, the cherry on top of a messy PR Sunday being, you guessed it,
Sydney Sweeney. She's like a very hot actress right now.
She's a registered Republican? Yes. Oh, now I love her ad. Is that right? Is Sydney Sweeney? You'd be surprised at how many people are Republicans. That's what I wouldn't have known, but I'm glad you told me that. If Sydney Sweeney is a registered Republican, I think her ad is fantastic.
When we dismiss criticism by saying it's not that deep and place people's concerns on the fringes, we get situations like this. People did not take into account how American Eagle's messaging could be tone deaf, specifically for people of color. It's not as if gene ads can't be done well. Look no further than the recent Gap ad featuring Cat's Eye, which not only championed inclusion within the cast, but also the clothes, hooking on to the nostalgic classic of Mean Girls, with every person covering the iconic choreography from Robbie Blue. The increasing prevalence of far-right ideology has been accompanied by a push to steer clear of diversity. Informing the public about experiences outside of your own can endanger institutions from upholding the status quo.
Mr. Hasty, what did you think we were before you began to think of us as human beings?
Well, in a way, we thought of you almost as a very superior pet.
I was born in 1950 in the South. This is the period of high segregation. We were in an environment that was almost completely shaped by this ideology of the lost cause, of the idea that the Confederacy had been this high watermark in American history and that we had been falling off ever since then. When you've grown up with that, it's just all-encompassing. You know, your vision of what America is.
This is why we are seeing book bans targeting stories centered on minorities and diluting their history to appease a filtered narrative. News outlets, public broadcasting, and even universities have been threatened with massive budget cuts from the current administration, largely due to them not succumbing to presenting information that aligns with those values. Because as the saying goes, an uneducated populace is easier to manipulate, control, and stifle. Okay, I made that last part up. This can make it difficult for people to come forward about injustices, especially if it will lead to punishment and stigmatization. We recently saw this in the docuseries America's Sweethearts, Dallas Cowboys Cheerleaders, which follows prospective candidates auditioning for the team, requiring sky-high standards for appearance, performance, and dedication to the process. These women, similar to their football player counterparts, are athletes, but to the shock of many, these women were not being thoroughly compensated. When a former cheerleader, Erica Wilkins, came forward about these discrepancies, she was ostracized from the organization until just recently. Erica revealed back when she was on the team that cheerleaders were barely paid minimum wage and often worked over 40 hours a week, while also not being able to capitalize on their likeness and image as a DCC, due to the stereotypical perception that fields dominated by women are pursued for honor, not money. This mentality spread like wildfire during Erica's time on the squad as a justification for their abysmal pay. After the intense backlash of America's Sweetheart Season 1, current cheerleaders decided to take legal action in the following season. After much advocacy, the cheerleaders received a 400% pay raise, as well as being able to profit from their DCC affiliation and reaping the benefits of their labor, setting a precedent that could help pave the way for other NFL cheer teams to follow. It took reevaluating a set norm that perpetuated sexism to make a meaningful change, which would not have been possible without people ushering criticism and Erica fighting in court before the DCC had Netflix's stage.
I am extremely grateful to have been a part of the start of that journey and the start of that progress in pushing for fair pay for these beautiful, talented women who deserve it.
As I'll be focusing on anime and manga throughout the rest of this video, this also means that as a Black person in fandom, I'll specifically be discussing how intersectionality plays a role in anti-intellectualism. When it comes to pushback towards criticism regarding serious matters, the standpoint hardly offers a well-meaning view. Rather, it's to berate and ridicule someone for simply voicing their opinion. This is why there is such a divide in responses to how we consume media, especially when viewed through a critical lens. One such situation that perfectly encapsulates this comes from a notorious figure on the Trash Taste podcast, specifically a statement from Joey, aka the Anime Man. Many people had thoughts and opinions regarding Joey's stances on anime tourism, but what raised people's eyebrows the most was his comparison to these individuals to that of
these anime tourists, or at least this new rise or era of anime tourists as the Columbus era of anime. You know, much like Christopher Columbus, who went to the Americas, mistook it for India, and called the natives now a term that I'm not allowed to say anymore, and you know, claimed the land for themselves because he was like, well, I discovered it, and fuck all of you guys. This is my place now. And I was like, holy shit, this is exactly what these anime tourists are doing. They're like coming to these unfamiliar lands, planting their flag in the soil, and going, we own this land now.
No way.
By making such an inflammatory stance, Joey was bound to receive pushback, and his response to the backlash fell on the ever so prevalent phrase.
Chill. It's not that deep. May I remind you, we are literally talking about Japanese cartoons. It's really not that deep.
Hey, Joey, I don't mean to be the bearer of bad news to you, but it is that deep. It really is that deep. And I just can't, in like good conscience, understand why you believe that 100 million Native Americans that died as a result of the westward expansion is somehow the equivalent of anime gaining an audience of normies that have opinions that you do not agree with. And I could only attribute it to you being intentionally dense so that you don't risk losing your audience of actually dense people. Gatekeeping and having this superiority complex over people who are just getting into the community is only going to increasingly uptake their radical opinions.
The phrase, "it's not that deep," has become so ubiquitous within the anime fandom that it is now used as a way to dismiss any sort of criticism. I have found this sentiment to be very common with the series Supergals.
Feel free to take this the wrong way. I'm seeing way too many out-of-pocket takes and comments.
You'll have people outright dismiss the blatant anti-black and colorist imagery and frame people of color's frustration over this as, "it's not that deep." In fact, whenever I have discussed this aspect of the series on my channel, these are some of the first comments I tend to receive. For those of you who haven't ever heard of Supergals, it's a series set in the Shibuya shopping district that follows the lives of our protagonists, Ran, Aya, and Miyu. During their adventures, they often confront shady people who relegate their existence as gals to that of being shallow. This stereotype is directly tied to Japanese girls who engage in the fashion subculture gyaru, which rose to prominence during the 90s when Japan's economic bubble burst, resulting in stock market prices inflating, which led to a recession. Japanese citizens began to have concerns that their social scene would be vanquished, and they combated this by directing their attention to the youth. This attention centered around violence and sexuality, which were ubiquitous among adolescents, which was why practices like Enjo Kosai were so heavily scrutinized. But that's not the only reason why gyaru was considered controversial. Girls partaking in the Gongoro subculture were rebelling against Asian beauty standards that favor fairer skin. But by exhibiting extreme tans and highly exaggerated makeup, the public often referred to these girls as promiscuous, dirty, and undesirable. We see this vividly in the way the Gongoro gals are treated by Ran and her fellow light-skinned peers, frequently labeling them as tan addicts and excluding them from their friend group. This mentality of painting Gongoro subcultures this way, such as the Yamamba and Mamba, branded a eugenics movement in Japan that enforced racial rejection of girls and women engaging with foreign culture to manage their sexuality, i.e., comfort women. These subcultures were created to empower Japanese girls, but by certain aspects of gyaru associating with blackness, it was viewed as a moral panic. This dichotomy is displayed throughout the Gongoro Gal trio's progression within the realm of Supergals. Characters such as Tatsuki and his little brother were also not immune to the effects of colorism. For a good portion of the series, the pair is referred to as monkeys.
Hey, you're not so bad. Maybe I'll take you on as my student.
Don't you mean you want to be my student? That is, if you think you can keep up with me, monkey boy. You're a million light years ahead of yourself if you think you can put your nasty monkey arm around my shoulder, you geek.
This was also indicative of Japanese politicians at the time labeling ethnic minorities as having extremely low intelligence, further perpetuating the power dynamics between light and dark-skinned people. When we look at the social and cultural context for certain media depictions, the conversation will always be that deep. It may not be that deep for you if you are not someone of darker skin, but we shouldn't outright dismiss people's criticism, especially putting this into the context of how this rhetoric affects dark-skinned people and the discrimination they face because of it. Even pushing a creator to develop a story and character that is emblematic of their lived experiences with colorism, dismissing people's perspectives on their interpretation of media prioritizes the individual over the collective impact. It compels us to remain complicit in our own worldview without seeking insights that challenge our pre-existing beliefs. Furthermore, this mentality also insinuates that broader context and history will deter you from enjoying your media. Not only is this takeaway incredibly lazy, it's also deeply irresponsible. As Constance Grady aptly explains, people have started to use weird, cockeyed interpretations of poptimism to argue that since we no longer trash popular art as a default and go out of our way to make the people who like it feel bad, we can't make any criticism of pop culture whatsoever, even thoughtful criticism that comes from a knowledge of the genre. This is what led to the let people enjoy things era, where any thoughtful analysis or critique could be immediately undermined as someone not offering a perspective, just a hater. Unsurprisingly, this dog whistling is frequently directed towards marginalized groups, namely women, queer people, and racial and ethnic minorities. By providing their opinions on polarizing topics that make certain folks uncomfortable, they're seen as cherry pickers and media illiterate. A side effect of unthinking when it's applied to contextualizing media analysis. These implications lead people to overlook factors of intersectionality that could provide a deeper reason why criticism exists in the first place. This can be particularly seen in discussions of race in media, as it is seen as insignificant since the majority who play devil's advocate remain largely unaffected by it. Dismantling any sort of feedback through a bait and switch to suggest that no matter your background or lived experience, if it doesn't fall within the consensus outlook, the onus is placed on you being the problem.
Particularly haunting is how easily bigotry cloaks itself in cultural protectionism, how often its reactionary instinct masquerades as nostalgia. The angry cries of punk being corrupted or co-opted aren't really about memory or preservation. They're about control. They invoke the language of authenticity, but their aim is exclusion. What they are doing is reasserting a narrow definition of who gets to belong, who gets to speak, and who is allowed to be seen as a thinking, feeling, and self-aware subject.
Combining anti-analysis, anti-intellectualism, and microaggressions, which loops around in a continuous cycle that goes through never-ending puberty. Initially, this pushback for voicing concerns about racial representation has come from far-right conservative circles. However, as of late, we are seeing more leftist and liberal people parroting this rhetoric, because no matter how progressive you might seem to think you are, racial bias, exclusion, and prejudice are universally held sentiments, even if you are a part of the community affected. The series Revolutionary Girl Utena has become a very telling indicator for me in this regard. It's a series that I found very compelling and is one I have covered on the channel before. One of the most integral parts of the story is the double entendre that centers around systemic oppression. The character of Anti-Intellectualism being the shining example of when trauma from dark-skinned girls is overlooked, their history remains locked away. However, the number of comments I received from my video in which people told me that it's rare to see intersectionality discussed in the series was shocking. To me, the lack of discussion surrounding the racial side of Anthony's character was a symptom of a much bigger issue. That issue is that light-skinned audiences can't relate to her racial mistreatment, so they leapfrog over it, leading to a simplistic view of gendered abuse. This provides a very surface-level way of engaging with Anthony, especially when it comes to Indian gender politics. As the Rose Bride bride, Anthe must display a specific version of femininity tied to domesticity and softness. This renders her meek, compliant, and role-playing as an indentured servant, largely by light-skinned men. The power dynamics at play between the roles of the Rose Bride and Prince are not just implicitly there, they are obscenely present. When Utena wins her duel to attain Anthe, Anthe struggles to grasp why she's being treated with respect, since her prior encounters have conjured demeaning reactions, in part because Anthe is expected to play into men's desires, a la her being objectified and over-sexualized. Never mind the distinct differences this has for dark-skinned girls compared to their light-skinned counterparts. Similar to what I mentioned with the Gongoro from Supergals and Momo from Peach Girl, Anthe coming to terms with her mistreatment spans across the entire series, where she learns the exploitative system that is Otori Academy, while also steadily resisting the loop that continues to pull Anthe in this abusive cycle with her brother. This guilt resulted in Anthe taking the fall for what was her brother's responsibility and sparking her deeply rooted oppression. Akio and Anthe's dynamic is heavily reminiscent of the very real human trafficking occurring in certain tribes of India. Girls as young as 14 years old were entrapped in marriage and were the ones who were reprimanded for familial matters. Domestic violence in these relationships is ingrained in these tribes' culture and unfortunately shapes the way love is viewed, despite not succumbing to systemic structures that keep this problem normalized in these communities. By Akio stifling Anthe to remain at his beck and call, not only strips Anthe of her individuality, but also dehumanizes her. Akio's consistent failure results in lethal consequences for Anthe. The parallel of swords piercing her body reflect real-world repercussions that come with practicing witchcraft. Anthe's magic is canonically derived from witchcraft, which is why her depiction of visceral torment were so graphic, because these situations actually happen. Ignoring the racial side of Anthe's trauma is a disservice to the entirety of what revolutionary girl Utena was trying to convey. Centering discussion of the series as solely a case of gendered oppression implies there is a universal default to this experience. As I've tried to showcase here, this is far from the case. By analyzing Anthe's character through an intersectional lens allows us to grapple with her resonant impact and also why her story was so triggering for many brown girls. There is a dual meaning behind the phrase "it's not that deep" and what it means for the landscape of pop culture and media. The first is the inability for you to look deeper into what you consume out of fear of that ruining your viewing experience. Devolving responses that don't directly match your own as haters and shamers will do nothing but isolate you in stagnation.
This mindset of "you're not in the room, so shut up and be a fan" kills art. It instructs audiences to turn off their brains while engaging with your work. It also reinforces to artists that any negative or non-positive constructive feedback is automatically abuse. That's how mediocrity thrives and how art begins to stagnate. Critique is uncomfortable by design. It's supposed to make you think. It's supposed to be provocative. When you silence it, you're not protecting your craft, you're only sheltering your ego.
At the same time, it is understandable why some use this phrase to disassociate from the current state of the world. Working all day and coming home to enjoy your favorite piece of media only to be met with snide remarks can be exhausting. I can even empathize with those who get frustrated over bad faith criticism that serves to feed someone's ego and does not address the root of the problem. But that doesn't mean that criticism is inherently bad and should be only offered through an archaic explanation. The resistance to critique has consequences. It dilutes complex topics into simple answers, it delegitimizes people's lived experiences and the importance of reflection, and most egregiously, it serves as a dog whistle to those who don't conform to the consensus, allowing them to be viciously attacked. However, by deconstructing the media we consume, we can come to a solid foundation of our own beliefs and engage more effectively with those who hold unique perspectives. Hopefully, people who continue to use the phrase, "it's not that deep," will wake up to the reality that this mentality is deeper than they think.